Welcome to today's City Board of Directors agenda meeting for September 10th, 2019. This is our opportunity to review the agenda for our formal board meeting that will be held on Tuesday, September the 17th, 2019. Now we'll have a presentation as being our Hunger Action Month. We'll hear an update
It's next Tuesday.
next week. Actually, I'm sorry. I'm looking at the wrong thing. All right, we have for tonight's agenda, we'll have a resolution to add M1 for the resolution to transfer a piece of the property to Central Arkansas. I have a motion for adding M1. There's a motion and a second. All those in favor, please say aye. All those opposed, please say nay. Motion passes. We also have item M2, which is to amend the solid waste collection fees. Do I have a motion? Well, we first have to get it added to. There's a motion and a second. All those in favor, please say aye. All those opposed, please say nay. Motion's added. Now M1 and M2 have been added to the agenda. We'll then hold M2 separate for discussion. We can now proceed to review the proposed agenda. Board members, are there any questions regarding items 1 through 9? Seeing no questions, 6. Redo it again for me, Director Adcock. I'm sorry. Director Adcock, then we have Director Hendricks.
I have a question on 2 and 4.
All right, what's your question?
On number 2, Mr. Moore, I'd like to know what the purpose of this is and what they are looking for and the cost of it and how it's going to be paid, please.
All right, Mr. Lowe. Ronnie Lowe, who's our Assistant Director of Public Works, will address item number 2 in regards to Park Mobile.
Mr. Lowe, what is this and what will it do for us, the cost of it, and how we pay them for it?
Park Mobile is a mobile parking payment system. So it's a system that will allow users at the meters to use a mobile app instead of coins and things like that. There is no cost to the city for the use of this. The user is a convenience fee. So the user downloads the app, and every time they want to use the app to pay for parking, there's a user fee of 35 cents that they pay in addition to what they're paying for parking.
They pay the additional, it doesn't come out of our part.
That's correct. We still get the revenue from the meters, and this provides us flexibility to, maybe add parking and charge for parking in areas that we don't have meters also right now. We have a lot of issues with the parking meters in the River Market right now, and this will be an additional option that allows people to use your mobile app to pay for parking in the River Market. Use the app, you put in your license plate number, pay for the time you're going to be there, and it'll cover you for parking.
Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Director Hendricks.
Thank you. On number 6, I'm interested in knowing what companies will be included with the towing.
All right. Mr. Hinton, if you would please approach. And Director Adcock, your answer, you did receive everything you needed from, yes, you did. Okay.
I got it.
Okay. All right. Mr. Hinton?
Mr. Mayor, members of the board, Director Hendricks, Asher Wrecker, Metro, and Adams are the ones that's going to be
Thank you.
that won this year.
That's mine.
Thank you so much, Mr. Hinton. For item number 4, Director Richardson.
Mr. Lowe, on item number 2, are we anticipating this helping us with the collection of parking fees?
This is not for parking fees. This is for paying for your parking. So instead of using coins in the meter, this will allow you to use your smartphone.
So we're anticipating this streamlining that process because we have a long list of people who are behind in their fines or fees. So are we anticipating this streamlining that to make that a little bit easier?
Well, you say you have a long list of people that are paying fees and fines?
They're not paying. I'm sorry, I misstated that. We
This
have
is
a
not-
host.
this
We
is-
have a long list.
The Park Mobile has nothing to do with the ticket system.
Okay.
So, the tickets are still handled the same way. We have a collection contract with Duncan Solutions to handle that.
Okay, got you. And Director Hendricks, I think of those 3 towing companies that were listed, I think one of them is a minority-owned company. I believe Adams is.
From Ward 1. All right.
Thank you, Ronnie.
Thank you, Director Richardson. We're going to go back to item number 4 that was not answered for Director Adcock.
Item number 4 is the Pleasant Valley Sidewalk Project, and this is the issue of the construction contract for that project. It's to build a sidewalk from Breckenridge over to the church under 430 to, it's from Breckenridge under 430 on the south side of Pleasant Valley over to the church where the existing sidewalk exists. It's a connection of a piece of sidewalk that's missing in there that leads up to the school. This is not being built by the city sidewalk crews and land. It's being built under construction. It's one of the bond projects.
Why did we decide to build this one in Pleasant Valley with an outside company and not with the city's company?
This was selected during the selection process for these bond and sales tax projects. This is one of those projects.
The infrastructure projects?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Lowe. Director Hines. Mr. Lowe, you may want to come back.
Ronnie, so kind of find it interesting, have we dealt with this vendor? Haven't known a lawn service company to do sidewalk construction.
Public Works has not. We have not dealt with this contractor.
Okay, so.
We had 5 bids and they were the low responsible bid.
Okay, so do we have anything in our bid process where they're going to post bond to make sure that this work's performed adequately?
Yes, they signed the normal contracts and there's performance bonds in there with
Okay,
that contract.
all right, thank you.
Thanks so much, Director Hines. Director Richardson.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. This may be a question for either you or Bruce related to that particular item. Is there any particular reason why we're not utilizing our reentry sidewalk program to do this work? Because I know we have a reentry program that we have been using to do similar kind of work.
Sure. Director Richardson, as you know, during the public process to select the projects for the various wards, the majority of wards chose to do sidewalk projects, new construction. The list of projects that our reentry crew focuses on is really in the hundreds already, probably 200s. And those are mainly rehab. So these are all new construction, and we just felt, and this isn't the first time we've done this. We've been doing it throughout the process, even with the reentry team in place, that in order to get these projects done, we needed to bid out.
Thank you. Well, another part of that question, our reentry work, is it geographically limited or geographically concentrated or geographically restricted in respect to that work that we're doing?
I would say answer number 3 is no, it's not restricted. But I would say that the majority of the requests that we have received and the majority of the work that's been done has probably been in wards 1 and 2.
That's what I was thinking. Thank you.
Director Hendricks.
I want to ask a question on 4,
Yes, ma'am.
and I need to talk to a staff person because I want to know about, well, maybe you can tell me. I'm concerned as to whether this gentleman, I'm sure, was the lowest bidder in this.
Yes, it went through the process. Mr. Lowe, if you want to come speak to those specific details on who was the lowest bidder.
Yes, this is the same, the Pleasant Valley Sidewalk Project. And this is a new contractor for us also.
I'm concerned. My question is, he was the lowest bidder.
Yes, ma'am.
And maybe I need to ask someone, maybe staff, but if this man should come back, I know I've seen this happen, where they are the lowest bidder, but then they'll come back 6 months and they want more money, and we give it to them. So I really think we need to take a look at this and put it in the minutes wherever, because if I'm here, I will certainly be watching if this man is coming back for additional money.
Certainly.
I'm a
And
businesswoman.
the bid items are in the contract, and he has contracted price for the bid items. So we'll measure in field what he's built, and we'll pay him for what is
And
built.
if he should want additional money, I'm sure you'll let the mayor know.
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lowe. Seeing no other questions from items 1 through 9, are there questions from items 10 through 12? Any questions? Director Adcock was first.
Yes, on item 10, Mr. Carpenter, I had asked for a red copy, and I understand Mr. Turner sent it to me today, but I have not got my printer done yet today. On this, or maybe Mr. Moore can tell us, what is the difference in what we're doing now and this one, except that we will not stay with the 2 years plan?
Mr. Carpenter?
I thought you'd ask at the minute last for Mr. Moore. One of the things that this does is it puts a certain percentage that will be inspected each year. It exempts brand-new construction from the initial cycle. They get 1 year out for sure before they would be inspected, so it would probably be 6 years before they would be inspected. And I forgot what the third one was. There was a third one. None of it impacts the ability to request a complaint inspection.
Okay. Mayor, I had requested this afternoon from Chief Hubbard some information, and I've just gotten it. I would like for staff to take it and give all the directors a copy of it. One of my questions was, how many fires, apartment fires, have we had in the last year? And the answer is 38. And my next question was, what was the cause of them? And the number one cause of the fire in the apartment complexes, out of 38, 14 of them was cooking. And this was because the top of the stove had grease accumulated on the top of it, and they was cooking. I have a problem where we're only going to look at 20% of an apartment complex. Now, this is a code violation if the stove top is not clean. That is a code violation. So if we're not going in each of these apartment complexes, I would wonder if we're going to have more apartment complexes when we don't check the top of stoves. The number two is still under investigation, and the third one was accidental. Electrical was the fourth reason for fires in apartment complexes, but when just about half of them are caused by cooking, that I think is a problem, and I want to make sure that we're not going to have more fires if we're not checking the stovetops in all of the apartments.
Sure. One of the things that this does allow us to do is if our code staff is inspecting an apartment complex and we're at that 20% threshold, but we see issues, we're going to continue with a full inspection. So this doesn't preclude us from inspecting the entire complex as we do now. This just says if we get in there and we do this inspection, again, this is 20% a year, so within the 5-year period, we will have inspected all of the multifamily complexes.
Mr. Moore, I'd like to know on the code officers, how many citations or warnings was issued over the stovetop issue of grease accumulating on the top of the stove?
Okay, we'll have to provide that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much, Director Adcock. Director Richardson.
Thank you, Mayor. On that same item, Bruce, have we entertained what I think is best practices and I think is being utilized across the United States, moving that 2-year cycle to a 5-year cycle and inspecting newly built units in year 6. Have we even thought about that? Are we open to amendments or any kind of adjustments to what we're looking at?
Well, and I think next Tuesday you'll hear from a group of residents that we've been meeting with for a number of years. We have looked at best practices across the country. And I said this probably 5 or 6 years ago, it does not make, to me, any sense to, when a new complex is opened, that it would go on the automatic list to inspect. And so I think it was well-intentioned back in the mid-'90s, but it never was really practical. And so we have spent a lot of time, not only staff, but with citizens groups, looking at this. This was actually before you all last fall, and then we deferred it. But I do think, and again, the most important part of this is if there are problems, we're still going to inspect the entire unit. This just gives us a threshold.
But newly built ones would be inspected in year 6 rather than when they're...
Unless there's a complaint.
Unless there's a complaint, so complaints are automatically inspected.
Correct.
Section 8 complexes, they're inspected by HUD, correct? And
Correct.
we don't have anything to do with those. So that's done by HUD,
Correct.
not the city.
Correct.
Well, I think it's something that we need to entertain, looking at Bruce, Victor, latest research of best practices or finding ways to make sure we're implementing a system that's going to be up to date, it's going to be effective for the city and the residents as well. So you have this duality that's working. We're working in concert with each other, not in conflict with each other.
Correct.
So hopefully we'll talk about that next Tuesday.
Thank you, Director Richardson. Director Wright?
Thank you, Mayor. Mr. Moore, now I'm looking at this, and it says the City of Little Rock will systematically inspect or review inspections or both conducted on 20% of the total registered rental units annually as selected by you or your designee based upon the units and complexes registered with the city. So 20% of 1,000. So if we got 1,000 registered rental units,
Yeah, we have more.
that's just a round number.
Yeah.
So if I have an apartment complex that I've gotten complaints about,
We will still inspect those. That's my point. This is the systematic approach. We still have a complaint system in place also.
okay, now, I understand that, but my big problem is single-family rental units that never get inspected, and people keep moving in and out of them. And I got a whole row on Barrel Road that I don't believe to have ever been inspected. And I'm passing by looking at them, and I've turned them in numerous times. So, how will this help me?
If you want to walk through the details.
Sure. Mayor, members of the board, I prepared something brief for you all to take a look at to give you a little idea of the rental landscape in Little Rock. Allie, go to the next one. So, what you were just speaking about, Director Wright, this is a breakdown of the units in Little Rock, registered rental units. And so the left-hand column shows the number of single-family ones that are registered in Little Rock by ward. And as you can see, in Ward 6 is 691 that have been registered that are single-family units. And as you go down the left-hand column, those that are in a category of duplexes to 10 units, that falls in that category. You can see that by ward. But there are 27,859 registered rental units in Little Rock that have registered. We always run across folks that try to skirt the law and don't register. As our code officers discover those, they submit those to Treasury to get them registered. So that gives you an idea of the breakdown. The biggest category are the complexes or individuals that are, or units that are in complexes that have 100 or more units. Those are the ones we don't have a whole lot of issues with because they have professional management. It is the folks, the mom and pop operations generally that have the most issues. So the way we have been operating within our current ordinance was we were focusing on single family. However, those are the people don't always register. So you may have some that in your area that didn't register. Go to the next one, Allie. So this is a percentage of the rental units by ward. So you can see out of our total registered graph here showing what percentage of those that are in your respective wards. As you can see, Ward 3 and 5 have the highest percentage of registered rental units. And a lot of that is, those are, particularly out in Ward 5, there are a lot of large apartment complexes. Next one, Allie. And this is just another graph showing you the ones that are over 100 is 61.5% or 62%. That's where most of our registered rental units. And then the next category of folks that are smaller, 10 units or less, is 22%. Next one. This, I know it's a little bit hard to see, but those black dots, that shows you kind of the concentration, and those are mostly single family and duplexes that are, densely populated in areas. You can see this is the western part of Ward 1 and into the northern part of of Ward 2. Allie, you can go to the next one. So you had mentioned, I think someone asked earlier, the difference between what we have and what we're going to. It is the best practice. We be consistent with other agencies that inspect rental units. That's kind of an industry standard, is you do a sampling size of 20%. And then from that sample, if you see there are problems, then you enlarge your sample, you inspect more. But generally, and we we have in the ordinance that it would be at least one unit in every building. So an apartment complex that has multiple buildings, we're going to go in each building and do a sampling in those buildings. So we'll get a pretty good idea of the overall condition of an apartment complex, or if it's fourplex or duplex, we'll inspect each unit. So here you see over a 5-year period, so we're doing that 20%, and as Bruce said, in 5 years we would have reached them all. Next one. So before it was biannually, so this is annually from all units, and there's no way with our existing staff we can do 27,000 plus in a 2-year period. So this is to help it be more manageable, also allow us to touch more properties across the city.
Can I ask ask a question here while we're on this section? So if a single family unit is getting a tenant has a housing voucher, would we inspect that prior to them moving in, or is that the Metro Housing Alliance responsibility?
Yeah, Metropolitan Housing Alliance is responsible for doing an inspection prior to anybody receiving a Section 8 voucher. What is in our ordinance, and there's a distinction, you have public housing units, and then you have folks that get a voucher. So any of us could have rental property and accept a tenant with a voucher. We inspect those. But the public...
The city?
Yeah, we do inspect those just like we would any other rental complex.
How would you know to inspect it?
Because they have to register them. The difference is public housing units are like the high-rises, and those we don't, because that's a responsibility of HUD. So they're listed in our ordinance as exempted out. Public housing units.
Right, that's
Section
separate.
8
I
voucher
understand.
recipients, they can go rent anywhere.
Anywhere.
Yeah, so it's not public housing.
So Metro is not required to inspect
Yes.
my rent house if I take people with a
Yes,
voucher?
if you accept a voucher, they're responsible for going out doing initial inspection.
To make sure
If
that
we
it's
get
habitable.
Yeah, we get a complaint, we also inspect it, and it should also be registered because it's a rental unit. They just accepting a voucher.
Do they know that?
Yeah, they should know that. It's common practice. So
Well, I'm not asking what they should know. Do they understand that?
they're supposed to register their units.
That's not Mr. Moore.
I can't speak to what all the landlords
Do we have
say.
a way to communicate that to them, Mr. Moore, that this is what we require?
Right, when you say do they know, who are you referring to?
Metro Housing Alliance.
No,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. So, Victor, again,
Because I've
there's
heard
a
something totally separate
distinction.
from this.
There's a distinction. So,
Right.
Just say it again.
Yeah, there's a difference. You have public housing, and then you have just any rental unit.
I understand public housing. I know what public housing is. That's Paris Towers. I'm talking about Trinity Village. I'm talking about Fair Oaks. Those people take Section 8.
Right.
Who inspects that?
They do, and us. Both Metropolitan Housing Alliance has inspected, and the City of Little Rock would inspect it as well.
Because I have had to go and do, based upon what the client was complaining to me about. And what I saw in there was some things that should not have even allowed some of this stuff to be rented.
Yeah, and generally when those things occur, if we know about it, we also contact Metropolitan Housing Alliance, and so they have right where they can pull that voucher or that tenant can go and rent from someone else, and that landlord not participate in their housing choice voucher program.
That is in their policy.
Yes, yeah, that's
Can I
part of
get a
their
copy of
federal
that?
requirement. Yeah, I can get that from them.
Provide
Yes,
that for
yes,
me?
ma'am.
I'd appreciate it.
Yeah.
Because I have heard conflicting information stating that they expect us to make sure that the rental units in the city of Little Rock are habitable. That when they give a person a voucher, they can go rent anywhere, and it's up to the city of Little Rock code enforcement to ensure that they are habitable.
We inspect it, but it's required by HUD that if they issue a voucher, that they're supposed to inspect the unit prior to them residing there.
Okay.
Now, whether they get to all of them, that they get monitored on by HUD.
Now, that's what my expectation would be, but I've heard to the contrary.
Yeah.
That especially on these single-family houses, that the person that house may not have gotten an inspection. Okay.
Allie, you can go to the next one. So this is another section where we made the change from biennial to annual, and most of the other components of the ordinance stayed in place. And I think there's one more, Allie. So annual report, previously it was January of each year, so we changed that to March to allow us time to tabulate all of our data and provide that to the city manager of our annual report. And also it was mentioned, not in this setting, but before, every one of our rental units is included. We put it in 311. We track the addresses, the units that we inspected, so we know which ones we inspected at what locations and what we need to go back to. So we're tracking it. So we know what 20% we did in 2019 versus 2020.
Good.
Yes.
Question, do we have enough rental inspectors? Are we fully staffed that we can even meet this 20%?
Yeah, we fully believe we'll be able to meet this. We always have the flexibility to add more to our rental team. We have one in each one of our 5 code enforcement districts. What this allows us to do is get to more of the complexes, because before that 100-unit complex, it wasn't a sample. We were doing all 100 units. So now if we go there and we don't find any issues in that 20% sampling, we can move on. So it'll allow our staff to be able to reach more rental units in a timely manner. So yes, we fully expect to be able to do them all.
So there's not a rental team, it's just a rental inspector assigned to each?
We have a rental team, it's just one that's assigned to each one of our 5 code districts. And they work as a team when they're large complexes. Single family, 4plexes, yeah, one person go in there and knock that out. But a larger complex, we put together a group.
Okay.
Yes. I think there may be one more, Allie, or that's it. That's it.
All right, Vice Mayor Wyrick.
Thank you. Thank you, Victor, for your clarifications on the information. Did you say that we have 27,000 plus units
Yes,
in the
ma'am.
city?
They're
Okay.
registered.
Registered.
27,859.
Okay. So to follow on with what Director Wright was asking questions about with the Metropolitan, are those numbers listed in your details that you gave us, the houses with vouchers?
Yes, those should be included in that. Those owners have to register those. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And I can tell you that I've had phone calls about real inspection, that they're saying it's the city of Little Rock and not their responsibility. So my question is, why is it that they inspect and we inspect? What's the reason for that?
Well, as our ordinance says, we inspect all the registered rental units. So that person that has a rental unit out there, they may or may not accept a voucher. You may have someone with a voucher this year, and next year it may be just, someone market rate. So that's why there are some dual inspections. Also, some of the tax credit projects, they get inspected by ADFA, and so we also inspect those as well. And one of the things that's listed in this proposed revision is other agencies that inspect those units, that we get a copy of that inspection and review it, and also reserve the right to go out there and inspect ourselves. But if they didn't find any problems, that we would accept their rental inspection.
So we kind of follow behind to make sure that their inspection is complete, and I guess according to what our rules are for inspecting.
Right, and we've worked with ADFA. They've contacted us on apartment complexes they've had issues and vice versa. So
So it
This-
sounds like y'all work together very well.
Yes, we do.
Okay, good. Under section 3, item number 4, it says title to the unit is conveyed or otherwise transferred, either voluntary or involuntary, to another party. So this is talking about the sale of a unit, right? It's not talking about what Doris was addressing, where you have people that are coming and going into these homes and they're not up to
Correct.
code.
Right.
Okay. So we have nothing that says that we need to follow someone whenever they vacate a residence and someone new comes in.
What it says is we have a certificate of occupancy. That CO is good until our next inspection or that we have a complaint.
So we're not following behind person to person that's renting the same unit.
No, ma'am.
Okay. So in Southwest, we have a lot of mobile homes. Where do mobile homes fit in this count? Are
They're-
they in there?
Yes, ma'am. They're
Okay.
included.
Okay. And so we have a whole nother team that deals with mobile homes.
Correct.
Is it part of the rental team or is it?
No, we have a mobile home team, but they're doing what the rental team does, but it's just focused on mobile home parks.
Mobile homes, okay. I think that was all my question. I was at a meeting last night, and we were kind of having a little debate. It was friendly. And we were talking about new construction that code would inspect. So did we used to inspect? Did we inspect new construction prior to this ordinance?
New construction, planning and development inspects those.
Okay. All right, so will they still do that, or
Yeah,
does this change?
this doesn't impact what they do at all.
Okay, so I guess I lost what we were talking about earlier. If it was new construction, then it would be 6 years before we
No, they
inspect it.
still going to receive all their inspections as far as part of the construction process.
You're talking about electrical, plumbing, and those
Everything
kinds
to
of
get
things.
them a certificate of occupancy. What this is saying is those new rental units that are 5 years old or less, we wouldn't go out and do a rental inspection till year 6 unless there's an issue that arises.
Okay,
And in that category, it's about 10% roughly that are in that age group of 5 years or less.
Okay.
10% of that total, about 2,800 in Little
Okay,
Rock
so
as
that-
of last
that
year.
That hasn't really changed. We still will do the initial inspections in order to turn them over to
Oh, absolutely.
rental. So, okay, all right, I think that's it. Thank you.
Director Hendricks?
My question may be sort of off the wall, but Victor and I have talked quite often about staff. And I want to know specifically if you have enough staff in your department to take care of all your needs. Because I know I have a lot from my constituents. The answer is yes or no, so that I can get on the mayor and Bruce to give you more money. Come on.
If you think having additional staff is going to
No,
eliminate
no, I didn't
having
ask-
code
You
issues.
don't ask me no question.
Well-
I'm asking you a question.
No, ma'am. I don't know if there's a magic number as far as
Do you
what
have
you
staff?
need.
Do you have adequate staff?
We're fully staffed now.
I didn't say that.
Yes, ma'am. I think we have enough to do what we need to do.
And the reason why I'm asking him is because it's a lot of things that isn't done at the request of constituents. I was elected by the people. You know, I could care less as an individual. I could care less as an individual, but I want to make sure that the needs of my constituents is met. And I will tell Mr. Moore and anybody else you're understaffed. Thank you. And they need more money.
Thank you so much, Director Hendricks. Director Richardson?
Yes, Victor, please, let me dovetail a question by Irma and BJ. Going back to my initial comments about have we looked at best practices across the U.S., if we went to 5-year cycles, would we have the capacity to do 100% rather than 20% we're talking about?
No, what it's saying is we're doing 20% annually, so after 5 years, we would have reached 100%. And you may have stepped out. This is in line with best practices. This is what other agencies do as a sampling. What we were doing was antiquated, trying to do every single one every 2 years, which is not, it doesn't make sense and it wasn't possible.
So explain the situation for me, please. I know we all know Arkansas has some of the worst landlord-tenant criteria, if we want to call it criteria. That may be too complimentary, but some of the worst landlord-tenant, I would say, criteria in the country. And dovetailing BJ's point, in Southwest Little Rock, we have a host of apartment complexes that are inhabitable, that are not fit to raise healthy children, youth, and families. So if one has deteriorated to a point where we know it's not habitable, and if they sell it to another company, before that company operates that, do we go in and inspect that to make sure that they're livable?
Yeah, what our ordinance, well, if it's one that's been declared unsafe, vacant, of course, and they getting a permit to do rehab work, both planning will be inspecting it and our department. So yes, we're inspecting it, and prior to any tenant renting it, they have to get a certificate of compliance from our department. So yes, they.
And that looks at mold and
speaking of mold, we went through our RFQ process, and we've hired a company that will look at mold.
Because there seemed to be a real consistent complaint recently. A lot of people living in apartment complexes that are filled with mold, and it's making the children and the families unhealthy, and it's having a real negative impact on their ability to function. On that point, to me, it seems like most of these, and this is just my opinion, and please allow me the right to be wrong in my opinion, it seems to me like a lot of these owners are more concerned with filling these units than they are the conditions of these units. And Tom, to the extent of us not closing, because I don't want to do that, because a lot of them have very limited options. If they had additional options, they would have been gone in the first place. Victor or Tom, what kind of legal action, if any, we can take to make these owners bring these apartment complexes up to par? Short of closing, I don't want to close them because we're going to put a bunch of people out, and if these people had alternatives, they would utilize them by now.
I mean, our current process, I mean, we issue notice, we issue citation. They have a period of time to bring the units into compliance. So we already have a mechanism in place for them to bring it up to code. The ones that you have seen have been closed, those generally are at such a state that, and they haven't adhered to our notice. So those are the ones that have gotten closed, but we hadn't closed very many.
Well, I don't want them closed, but
Yeah,
I think what penalties do we have in place that if they don't bring them up to code,
they're cited to environmental court.
then?
And then there are fines, daily fines, and different other options that the city has.
Because it seems like we have a host of companies, some of them in a couple of, I won't name them, but some of them in a couple of other cities, Tom, that are being sued by those municipalities based on the operation of those units. I think Hot Springs has been one of them. I think there's one in Missouri that's suing one that's recently purchased over 1,000 units in southwest part of my ward. I don't want them, Victor, I don't want them closed because I think that'll put a lot of people out in the community. So, Tom, have we entertained any kind of lawsuit or any kind of mechanisms in place to address that or enforce what we're talking about here right now?
Director Richardson, we've gone after rental property that didn't meet code and asked that it be dealt with accordingly, and we've been successful in the past. We've also gone after properties, particularly when drug activity was there, particularly when methamphetamines were being cooked there. We ended up not only dealing with the apartment where that happened, but had to clean out the entire building before they could get back in. The types of litigation in Missouri and California and those states are being watched. They're going after the banks many of the times that have funded the individuals that are renting the apartments. And there has been some success on that, but it's not widespread. I don't know about what Hot Springs may or may not have done.
Well, I think they just recently filed one against a company that owns, just recently bought a bunch in southwest Little Rock, and I think that was interesting. So, Tom, have we had any in our CAP program at all, Victor?
Yes.
And when they're in the CAP program, do we just shut them down?
we have shut down some when it got to the point that you couldn't do anything else. The one I remember the most is over by the highway department. The railings didn't fit. There were leaks in the roof, and they basically put up plastic bags to try to keep the water from getting in. The commodes weren't connected, and that one we got after. But I don't know that we've shut down a lot, and nor have we tried to shut them down forever. I mean, we understand the need for housing for all people, and we try to get the things into compliance. Victor would know more.
So Victor, when that happens, what kind of supportive services do we have in place to help relocate those people? Do we partner with the Housing Alliance, or do we use internal mechanism to help assist those people being displaced?
Yeah, whenever we close apartment complex, our department provides 3 days in a hotel, and then our resource specialists work with them on finding them some permanent housing elsewhere.
Good deal. Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much, Director Adcock.
Victor, I'm sorry. We'd just like to see you walk back and forth. I would like for you to, you've got one blank line here where it says over 100, right underneath that line. I'd like for you to add in the mobile homes, because I'm sitting here with my math, and I don't see the mobile homes in either the numbers of apartments or the numbers of single family, because we have around 3,000 mobile homes in the city of Little Rock.
Yeah, the mobile homes are required to be registered, so they're included in these numbers.
Where are they?
They're listed as in the categories there. So we treat them, I mean, they're categorized just like if it's a mobile home park with 30 units in that, they would be in that category 21 to 30.
Okay, I would like for you to get us a list of the mobile home parks and the
Yes,
numbers
ma'am.
of people in them. The Attorney General's office is looking at the contracts that people have in the mobile home parks. Have they contacted the city of Little Rock yet?
I haven't spoken with them.
Mr. Carpenter, have you talked to them?
Ma'am.
Because there seems like there's lots of people being evicted under mobile homes that are owned by the individuals, but they can't move them because of the age and the conditions. And so then the mobile home park owners then resell them when the people are evicted out of them. So I'd like to see, in addition to what numbers you've got here, what numbers are on the mobile home parks.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Director Wright, come on back,
You should
Mr.
have
Turner.
known better to walk off.
And-
Okay, now, this is
And
related.
hopefully that this can be our last question on this.
Yeah, if you get as many questions as we apparently get, you would be questioning this very closely. This is a very serious issue. The last time I was by the Neighborhood Resource Center, which was quite recently, we appeared to be down 2 people. So, but you're telling me that you're fully staffed. Have
Yeah.
y'all hired people and brought
Well,
them on?
we're at 35. We're interviewing right now to fill those remaining slots. So yeah, we got approved to fill those.
So I am
places.
down 2 people in that resource center.
Yes, ma'am.
Because I was asking about some houses that I had gotten some complaints on, and I was told that the person that was assigned to that, those people had moved on, and so they were doing double and triple duty.
Yeah, we've been
in there.
approved to fill those vacancies.
And when do you think that's going to happen?
They were interviewing today.
Okay. Thank you.
Director Hendricks.
Mine has to do with number 12. I'm through.
Thank you, Mr. Turner.
You're asking for us to dispense with competitive selection. How long has this program been going on? I know how long, but I want to hear it from whomever.
Mr. Carpenter, can you share the legal perspective, please?
Yes, sir.
Question is, how long has this program
This
been
was a
in existence?
6-month program, and what this ordinance does is it extends it for an additional year. The 6 months began in what was a relatively mild year, and we haven't operated it during a winter time. So we'd like this to stay in place for 18 months total, where we will have the winter months in there too and see how it works, get the data together, and then give it to the board so we can decide how to shape what type of program, or if we have a type of program in the future and how it goes on. So this is really just keeping the same group in place for 12 months to continue the experiment and make sure that we've looked at it during all seasons.
So, Tom, this is an ordinance that you put together.
Well, I mean, I drafted the
Just
ordinance.
saying.
The question was whether we could do it, and the initial 6 months was a pilot program anyway.
Yeah, I
And,
know.
and what was determined is that we don't really have enough data after 6 months to be able to say what we need to do next. So we're trying to get the data together.
And so, Director Hendricks, I asked that
I know what he's saying, but that doesn't mean I agree with him.
Yes, ma'am. But I was just, while Tom put together the ordinance, initially this board agreed to do a 6-month trial. I've asked, along with other board members, but particularly me, I asked that we extend it to have a full year so we can understand what this program will look like, seeing all of the seasons within a year.
You said 4 years?
1 year, so we could see all 4 seasons within a year.
Okay,
Yes, ma'am.
thank you.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you. Seeing no other questions, items 1 through 12. Of course, we already know what's going on with item 13. We'll move now to item 14. City Chief Financial Officer Sarah Linehan, if you would, please give us the quarter 2 financials. And everyone will proceed. She'll go through the quarter 2 financials, and then we'll have questions once she's done with the entire report. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Mayor, members of the board. Ally, we'll move to the first slide. Again, this is the second quarter financial report. So you can see that in April, May, and June, the city had achieved 33.94%, 41.02%, and 48.29% of the annual budget, and that compares to 33%, 41.67, and 50% for just the number of months of the year. On the next slide, you'll see the dollar amounts. So through the end of June, our revenues had reached $97,752,676 against a budget of $101,213,037, and compared to $93,263,424 a year ago. This is about $3.5 million below budget and approximately $4.5 million above the same period a year ago. A lot of the variances are due to the timing of annual revenues, and we'll talk about that on the next slide. So when you see the categories of revenue, I know that you all are very familiar with the way that property tax revenues come in. Approximately 40% of those are received each year in the April timeframe when that first due date comes at the county. We collect about 10% in the second and third quarters, and then the remaining 50% is collected around the November timeline when that final payment is due. Through June, the city had received 45% of the annual budget, which is right in line with our expectation. The original charge that we received from the county indicated growth of 3.62% over the prior year. Our original budget forecast was at 4%, so pretty much in line with that as well. When we look at licenses and permits, you see a $3 million favorable variance there, and that's due primarily to the timing of business licenses. The annual business licenses make up $6.9 million of our total annual budget for licenses and permits, and those are due annually on the first of the year, and so we generally collect those either in advance in December or in the first couple of months of the actual year. Through the end of June, we had obtained 95% of our annual business license budget. Obviously, there's new businesses that come online too that are part of that budget number. Also in licenses and permits, we have our mixed drink supplemental payments, and then we have our planning permits. 56% of the annual budget on the mixed drinks had been collected. We're only at 44% of the annual budget on building and related permits. Last year, we had some very large permits for Bank Ozark and then also the Southwest High School. In discussion with the planning director, he thinks that we may be approximately $245,000 below the annual budget at year end, and so that's one of the items we're considering for a budget amendment later in the year. In our intergovernmental revenue line, that one is showing below budget 4.9 million, but you'll see it's zero in comparison to the same period a year ago as well. Those revenues are received annually in July, so you'll be seeing that in next month's report. Our annual budget was in the $9 million range. We actually were notified that we received $10,561,000. About 4.3 million of that is dedicated entirely to the closed police, fire, and pension plans. It's passed through to those plans, and the remaining 6.2 million is available for general fund expenditures. On the fines and fee line, we're actually, this shows that we're behind budget, and we are behind budget only by about $18,000. The remainder of the variance is due to the reversal of January and February revenues for ticketed tickets that were assessed like in November and December that were then collected in January, February. Those revenues get pulled back to the previous year. Same thing happens at the end of each year. So we reverse that that accrual that pulls that revenue back, and that offsets early revenues to create a negative. This is consistent with what happens each year. Our investment income has a favorable variance. That too is 20,000 of the variance is due to the reversal of the year-end fair market value adjustment. With the exception of that, we're about 9,000 below budget on our investment income, and that's due to lower fund balance. Miscellaneous revenue is over budget by $1,420,000, and as we discussed in our first quarter report, that's almost entirely due to the fact that Little Rock Convention and Visitors Bureau decided to retire their short-term financing note early. They made a contribution to the city that's reflected in miscellaneous income of $1,748,000. There's corresponding debt service on the debt service line. We have in all of our short-term note agreements that we may prepay those without penalty, and they elected to do that. And so when we bring forward a budget amendment later in the year, it will show both that revenue and that debt service. Again, there's no impact to the bottom line. It's a pass-through item. On the next slide, we'll look compared to a prior year. So you can see our general property tax revenue has a very small variance, and again, the majority of those revenues are collected at year end. But we do believe we're on target to achieve our budgeted growth rate there. Sales tax I'm going to spend a lot of time on in just a few minutes, so I'm going to postpone that right now. And I think we've already hit the other highlights. The $1,743,000 on miscellaneous is entirely due to that short-term note early retirement that I just mentioned. So now we'll move on to sales tax. So these results, it shows June through August represents our April, May, and June sales tax revenues. They're received 2 months behind. So we received our June revenues August 27th. The first thing that I think you will notice is the really tall line that almost reaches 20% there for sales tax growth in the month of, it was collected in June, but it was for sales in the month of April. We had 14.56% growth that month, 2.58% in May, and 2.71% in June. Now, obviously, that very large result is an unusual thing. We followed up with the state as much as we can. The state is very limited on the information that they can give us. We do receive information by NAICS code, and that is really the depth of the information that we're able to obtain. The city's portion, and I'll tell you more about that in just a second. The city's portion of that, which represents is the red line, actually had 18.46% growth. The county portion was 10.31% growth. The majority of that growth was in a single category called electrical goods wholesalers, and I've communicated this to you in the last couple of months in the sales tax memo. The unusual increase could be associated with the filing of amended sales tax returns over multiple periods. If that's done by the taxpayer themselves, it does not show up in an audit column and it does not show up in the rebate column. It's just a self-reported amendment. If that's the case, that would be good news. That means we get to keep it. If it is just a very large sale, for example, and I don't know that that has anything to do with it, but Energy's been replacing meters throughout the city. It could potentially have something to do with that. It could be any number of things, but it's possible that a large purchase was made that created that large volume increase, but a rebate is coming, and businesses have up to 12 months to claim that rebate. So that the state has advised that you use extreme caution in utilizing out of character revenues because of the potential for the rebate. The rebate period will extend through May of 2020. And as you are aware, whenever there are purchases made on a single invoice, the local tax is capped on the first $2,500. So I could buy $1 million as a business. I could buy $1 million worth of meters and only pay, $32 and whatever to the city in local tax because it's capped at the first $2,500. I could claim a rebate for the difference. So I know that's a lot of time on that one variance. I just want to caution you that we do not want to include that in any of our projections for the future, pending the potential for the rebate. We asked the state if they could tell us whether this was due to amended returns or it was a rebatable situation without disclosing the taxpayer. They are not allowed to provide any information other than the NAICS code due to taxpayer confidentiality laws. But the good news is, in all 3 months, we did have positive growth, and it exceeded 2% in all of those months. Year to date, the city sales tax has increased 5.46% through June over the same period a year ago. The city's, that was the city piece, I'm sorry. The city share of the county has increased 3.13%, so the combined blended rate is 4.3% growth, and that does include that anomaly in the month of April. On the next slide, you just see the blended results I just mentioned. So again, the combined impact of the April result was 14.56%, with 2.58% in May and 2.71% in June. The rolling 12 months, we've seen growth of 2.85%, and that does include that one large month. When I take that out and I normalize it and assume that we hit our budgeted growth amount for April, kind of pull that out, that brings our year-to-date 0.54% above budget and at 2.17% growth. So that just gives you, a little bit more of a normalized number if that rebate does come back and hit us. The next slide shows the monthly results. So again, you see the 14.56% for June receipts for the month of April. In comparison to a year ago, that was 12.84% above our budget. So year to date, we're at 2.64% above our budget and 4.3% above the same period a year ago. But again, when I normalize those results for April, what we're looking at is 0.5% over budget, which is about $275,000. Or 2.17% over the prior year, which is $1,085,000. On the next slide, we see the revenue that's been provided by the new sales tax. Again, that same on line 4, you see the same large receipt because, of course, it applies to all of the local tax. In this case, though, we allocate the tax received as it comes in to the various projects. So when the rebate happens, if it happens, that will lower the receipts for that month, and there will be less in that month allocated to the projects. But for now, this has been fully allocated to the outstanding projects. So year to date, we've received 16.2 million toward the 5/8 cent operating sales tax that supports the police and zoo and parks and all the different operating initiatives. 9.7 million in the 3/8 cent capital tax, for a total of 25.9 million year to date. Over the life of the tax, we've collected 228.6 million toward operations, 137.3 million toward the 3/8 cent capital projects, for a grand total of about 366 million in expenditures, or in revenues, excuse me. Okay, now we'll move on to our franchise fees. Our electric franchise fees, as we have discussed in the past, Energy provides us with an estimated annual budget. The adopted budget is 14 million based on the information that Energy provided. The cost recovery credit that was associated with the impact of the Federal Tax Cut and Jobs Act expired in December 2018 for industrial and commercial customers, but it extends for residential customers through the end of December. Our January, February, and March results were compared to the first quarter a year ago, which is before that Tax Cut and Jobs Act credit started. Energy had to go back to the Public Service Commission, reverse the rate increase, and then also provide customer credits. So that's why you see, like in January, a 39% decrease in revenue when there was just a 6% decrease in usage. And that's because it was compared to a period before those rates were reversed. By the time we get to April, May, and June, you're seeing a very minor change in usage, just 0.29% in April, but we're 23% above the same period a year ago on the revenue side, and that's because of the expiration of the industrial and the commercial customer credits. Okay? So year to date, our usage is down 3.19%. We had, I know it doesn't feel like it the last few weeks where we've had record, very hot days, but prior to this period, we had had a milder year. And our usage was down 3.19%. Revenues are up 0.91%. However, the comparison, while they are slightly above where we were last year, the forecast we received from the utility, which gave us the estimated monthly revenues, was $6,350,000. That's what we used in our budget. We have received $6,026,000 in 2019 revenues. So right now we're trailing our budget by about $324,000, and that's the number that I use when I'm analyzing whether or not we need to consider an adjustment. Now, with the heat we've had this summer, and we do not have we have revenues, I think, for July, which was right in line with budget. We do not have our August receipts yet, so I can't tell you how that compares at this point. On the next slide, kind of same song, second verse, except with gas franchise fees, the credits did not start occurring until later in the year. And with last year, and with the gas, with CenterPoint, the rebate credits were finished at the end of February. So we see the biggest hits to the revenue in comparison to the same period a year ago in January and February, where we had declines of 21% and 16%. The decline in May is almost entirely related to the reduced usage because we had such mild weather. Once again, we get a monthly forecast from the utility. Our year-to-date revenue is $2,108,000. The forecast they gave us, and when I say we get a monthly forecast, I want to explain that. The utility gives us an annual projected revenue number that we use in our budget process. Then they estimate for us the monthly amount for each month of the year, and their basis for that is assuming usage comparable to the prior year with whatever rate changes are in effect. So if we have wild weather variances from the previous year, then the revenue, the estimates are not going to be accurate because they're based on comparable usage. But at this point, we're about $182,000 behind on our gas revenue based on the information provided by the utility. Now we'll move on to our expenditures. So with the general fund expenditure budget, through the end of June, our expenditures are, and this, I want to make sure you're aware, this is now in comparison to the amended budget. The budgeted numbers include the amendment that the board passed June 4th. So with 50% of the expenditure budget, the city had expended 50.87%. So we were slightly over that 50%, but those reductions that took place will take place in the second half of the year. So on the next slide, you see the dollars. We had expended $101.4 million of our annual expenditure budget, and that one half of the annual expenditure budget is $99,662,553, and that compares to $95,927,788 the same period a year ago. So we were approximately $1.7 million above budget and about $5.5 million above the same period a year ago. We look at the next slide, we'll see the different categories. A negative number in the variance column represents an unfavorable variance. A positive number of favorable variance. So in general administration, the unfavorable variance of $482,000 is primarily due to the timing of some of our outside agency contributions. Those are contributing $350,000 to the unfavorable variance. You'll recall in our budget amendment, $500,000 of the contribution to Rock Region Metro was reclassified from the general fund to the street fund. Rock Region Metro gets the same level of funding. It's just the source that has changed. But moving that that budget amount out of the general fund and putting it in the street fund is causing a temporary negative variance there of that is affecting that. In addition, there's an encumbrance for the contract with the chamber that was affecting that variance. Those are really the two primary variances there. We've already talked about the traffic court variance, and that is annually. There's a public defender amount that we pay in January each year. It's one lump sum paid in January, and that's the cause of that variance. That'll be in line with budget at the end of the year. When we turn to the next page, we'll see the rest, the other half of the expenditures. I've split it out so it's a little bit bigger on the screen, made it 2 pages instead of 1. As we move down the line with golf, about 50% of the variance in golf is just due to the timing of the contributions for the operation and maintenance of the first tee course. We had a contract in place with the first tee to manage that course the first half of the year. We had $120,000 in the original budget. The board approved an amendment of $160,000 to carry them through July. Since that time, though, the city is now operating that course, so there are no additional contributions that go to the first tee to manage that facility. We are managing that facility now. But again, the timing, since we took 2 of the golf courses, are planning to repurpose those, that reduction in expense happens in the second half of the year, which is also contributing. That's the other half of this unfavorable variance, is the timing of that. The police favorable variance, when we look at that, about $767,000 of that is just due to the timing of the contributions to the closed police pension fund. The police, LOPFI bills us a flat amount per month for that closed police pension plan, but we contribute 100% of the revenues that are dedicated to that in order to pay down that unfunded liability. We contribute whatever the difference is between what they bill us and what we collect on those dedicated revenues at the end of the year. And so that is temporarily creating a favorable variance of $767,000. About $814,000 of the favorable variance is associated with personnel cost, and that's primarily due to the timing of incentive payments that happen at the graduation of recruit school, and also the sick leave incentives for the officers that have been here with over 20 years of service that have accrued the maximum on their sick leave incentive. So those incentives had not occurred prior to this time frame. Again, we expect police to be in line with budget. Principal payment on the debt, this negative variance, is due to the timing. Our debt service on our note payments is paid on the anniversary of the notes typically, but we did have that payoff of the note taken out for the Cromwell building for LRCVB. That $1.7 million principal payment is primarily the driver for this negative variance, that and the timing of the notes. And again, that was fully offset by the revenue contribution and miscellaneous revenue that we've already talked about. Now we'll move on to our vacancy savings. So the initial budget, which was not changed in the June 4th amendment, was a $5.5 million annual target. Through the end of June, we had achieved just under $3.5 million of the variance. There were 119 budgeted positions that were unfilled in the general fund at the end of the second quarter. The vacancy savings will slow in the second half of the year due to the fire and police schools that are in session. Of the 119 budgeted positions that were vacant, there were 16 police officers and 4 higher level uniformed sergeant positions, but another recruit school began on August 19th, which brought the department to full staffing of authorized uniform positions. On the vacation sick payout, we had an initial accrual at the beginning of the year of $1,250,000. We had paid out about $617,000 through the end of June. The next slide shows the number of vacant positions in the general fund over the last 12 months. And I've highlighted there the timing of those recruit schools. But again, grand total of 20 uniform positions, 16 of those being officers and 4 sergeants were included in that 119 number. But the other another police school began August 19th. In addition to those vacant positions, there were 83 unfilled positions in the street and the enterprise funds for a grand total of 202 authorized but unfilled positions and savings of about $5.4 million citywide. So that concludes the second quarter financial report. I'd be happy to take your questions.
Do we have any questions about the second quarter financials from the city board? Thank you, Director Adcock.
Can we go back to page 13, please?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, I'm sorry, it's page 15. Can't read my writing. When we made all those cuts and everything, how did we still have a shortage of $275,000 in the Gulf?
Because the golf was spending 100% of that budget the first half of the year. None of that reduced expense kicks in till the second half of the year, and 100% of the first T payments happened in the first half of the year. We paid $280,000 all at once, and that was the entire annual budget. It was initially $120, but we added the other $160 to cover them through June. So that's what's creating
I
that.
guess whenever you said the 120 and then you said the 160, I assume that we increased the 120 to 160, but you're saying we did 120 plus an additional 160.
Right. The 120 was 3 monthly installments at $40,000 each, and that was to manage and to maintain the city's facility. That was not to support the First Tee program. It was to manage and maintain the city's facility. When we reduced staffing and went from 4 to 2 courses, we're using city staff to manage that facility now. We are no longer paying them to manage the facility.
I would like to have a complete breakdown of the cost of First Tee at this point, how much we're paying out for salaries, and how much income we've got coming in, because what I'm being told is that all those people who had paid 1 year membership, that they have now showed up at First Tee, and of course their membership was extended through the end of the year.
You mean the city people who bought 1 year memberships at War Memorial or Heinemann? Yes.
That they're all being used at First Tee. So I would like to have a complete balance sheet breakdown of the First Tee.
Okay, we have very little data at this point because it's only been 1 month, that they've been operating since. All the July results would be what we will have. We have
July,
not.
August. Okay, and on Jim Daly, we had made some cuts to theirs, so how do we still show 36,000 that was overspent in just the 3 months?
Well, this is the first half of the year. This is the second quarter report, but it's a year to date from January through June. For, the fitness center did have additional contract expenses and water expenses. Those are the two drivers for that variance. But their revenues are also up. I believe about $50-some thousand, which offset that expense.
I would like to see that offset on that too, please.
Okay.
Okay, and then the housing department, the
That would be-
housing
okay.
and neighborhoods, they lost several employees, particularly 5 neighborhood resource specialists. So how do they still come up with that whenever we had
They were
5
right in line with
positions?
their budget for the first half of the year, and none of those reductions happened until the 1st of July. And so you'll see, again,
And I
the
think
budget's
that-
been reduced.
I think a good one. This board will see the net positive of the decisions that they made going forward. We have to understand that the decisions that were made happened in the month of May and did not go into effect until July 1. So what you're seeing right now is what we were looking at and why we had to make some decisions going forward in addition to the loss that was taken in 2018. So again, a lot of, Director Adcock, what you're wanting to see is you won't see that until you see quarter 3 and quarter 4 going forward. And you'll see some of this as we talk through the budget 20 discussion. So again, that may be what you're desiring to see, but you won't see that until quarter 3 and quarter 4.
What I'd like to see, Sarah, is the loss of those 5 resource specialists. How much is that going to help the housing and neighborhood department?
Okay. And that will show up too when we move into the budget discussion.
Okay, and how much has our salaries overall gone down since we made the budget cuts?
And again,
Or has the salaries gone up since the budget cuts?
The salaries have gone down since the budget reductions. Now, we had initial, like vacation sick payouts where people had accumulated sick leave or vacation pay. But if you'll look back at the slide, hold on just a second. Allie, go to the second to the last slide. See that $1,250,000 that we budgeted at the beginning of the year? That's budgeted in general administration. Through the end of June, we had expended $616,000. What that is for, what that $1,250,000 is for employees that are retired or that leave the city during the year who have accumulated vacation pay or sick leave. And so we reclassify that budget. It starts out in general administration because we don't know where those employees, we don't know who's going to retire in advance. When they retire, we take the money that was accrued in general administration and we reclassify it to the department where that happened to offset the additional expense. So there will be some additional expenses that happened for employees who receive vacation sick payouts. But I also want to remind you, most of those employees were placed. So into either the street fund or, waste disposal positions or other positions that were posted to be filled that were not reduced.
Okay, now the grant that we just got, where we filled 6 maintenance positions, was those the maintenance positions that we had laid those people off?
No, that money is supposed to be for, that's a grant associated with the flooding. So that's what that's for.
And so whenever the flooding is all cleaned up, those people will lose their jobs?
That's a temporary grant, yes.
And they understood that they're temporary jobs?
Yes, yes.
Okay, thank you.
And again, Director Adcock, I just want to make sure we're all aware again, we'll start to see the net positive of the decisions that we made quarter 3, quarter 4. And a better way to look is when you see some of these variances, just understand if we did not make those changes, those variances would be multiplied into as far as increasing from a
Okay,
negative
Sarah,
standpoint.
also there is one other thing I'd like to have. In the past, Mr. Moore always provided for us each department, how many employees they had, how many employees are no longer there, and how many employees have been added. I would like to see that sheet too, please.
Yeah, we do that each year with the budget. We've never done that monthly, but I can do that with, we'll have that in our budget preparation this year too, that
So
shows
I'd like
the,
to see it from January the 1st till July the 1st of 2019.
It'll be the same information you received when you passed the budget last year in December. Just want to make sure you're aware of that.
we,
If we
adding,
didn't make
your-
any change.
so you want to know adding positions?
Any positions that's been added since January the 1st to June the 1st.
Okay, so
Where are
these
those-
these
where are
aren't
those
vacant positions that were filled. This is where we actually add a position. Okay, added and deleted positions since, okay,
Like the one in housing is going to show those 5 deleted positions.
right,
And any positions that was added.
okay,
Thank you.
I can do that.
All right, Director Hines.
Sarah, I think I already know the answer based on the reporting in this report. I know our revenues lag 2 months with the state's, the sales tax collection, but you said that the revenues for our franchise fees from the utilities lag a month.
They
But
lag
we-
a month and
but we
the
don't-
property tax lags 2 months.
Okay. Do we go in and, like we do with sales tax, and apply those to the months it was collected? Okay.
We retroactively, so, for example, if the water consumption or whatever is May, and we receive that revenue in June from the utility, we accrue it back to the month of May to reflect that revenue
Okay. So you're accruing.
in the month that it's earned. Yeah, in fact, that financial ordinance does say that we're not to follow cash basis. We are to accrue.
Okay. All right.
Thank you, Director Hines. Director Wright?
Yes, Sarah, you mentioned that most of the employees that were laid off as a result of our decisions were placed. How many were not placed? Mr. Moore, can you answer?
2.
2.
And when I say that, and that was at their choosing, they were offered positions, they chose not to. I think one of them wanted to go live with her daughter that just had a baby, and I can't remember the other one, but my memory serves me, it was 2 that. But again, they did have opportunities.
And I think there might have been a couple that were on the verge of retirement that decided to retire too.
So we really don't have anybody that can bump somebody else out of a position now.
That would have occurred during that process if they wanted to do that. And
But here's, I think what you're referring to is not the bumping, but the recall rights, and that's still in place. That let's take a position at the Jim Daly Center that was eliminated. If we were for some reason within the next 18 months to fill that, to advertise that position or given approval to fill that position, that person who was in that position has the first right of refusal. In other words, if they were in good standing and all, we have to offer them that position before we can offer it to anybody else.
Even though they've
Within
gone and taken another job.
Well, yeah, I mean, they might have taken a job in Public Works, but they really want to work at the Jim Daly Center. So, yeah,
Okay. So say it's a position that they weren't in, that you're filling someplace else. They would still get first right of refusal for any position
no, just that position.
at that facility where they came from.
whatever position they
No,
held.
but you got to remember that we have some positions that are the same throughout the.
So if it's the same position, universally, they would
Correct.
get the first right of refusal. Okay,
Correct.
I just wanted to make sure I understood that. Thank you. But we only have 2 that weren't placed.
Thank you, Director Wright. Director Richardson?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. On that point about bumping and right of refusal, we have had cases where we've actually had people who had certain skill sets that made them more viable to working inside City Hall, that we've moved out to other facilities and other departments, correct? That we didn't move them, they chose to take those jobs rather than retire or resign.
If their position was going to be eliminated, and remember, we got in the whole discussion because we wanted to inform everybody and all and get the process working with HR. So if the position was scheduled to be eliminated, HR worked very closely with each of them individually to say, okay, here's your current options based on your skill set and your positions. And so, yeah, and as Sarah said, some chose to retire, some chose, to move on.
Well, that 2 number is really, really incredible. It's really impressive. But I have one other question I think Joan had raised with respect to First Tee. We're in charge of maintenance and operation of First Tee right now, correct? Did we transfer or move staff from Hyman and War Memorial to fulfill those duties and functions?
Yes, we did.
The other part of that question is with respect to those contributions that we were giving them, because First Tee primarily was a youth-led or youth-run kind of youth-oriented programming. Did we take funding from Parks or General Fund or PIT to make those contributions? Where did that funding come from?
The funding that we did for operation and maintenance of the course came from the general fund. It was part of the golf allocation in the budget each year.
And that was the only funding we gave them?
There may have in the past, although I don't know if there's been in the past year or so, but when community programs would put bids out for certain programs, they might compete for that and be awarded something through that for their programming, but that was separate from maintenance and operation of the facility. That would have been for a specific program. Now, I want to make it clear, our First Tee still has a First Tee program, and they operate at that facility. We just don't fund it unless it's through a competitive process like that in order to have specific children included or a certain classification.
So Bruce, have we operated any after-school program from PIT funding with First Tee? Because a lot of our PIT funding should be dedicated to certain demographics of our community based on how we sold it in 2011 and 1993. So have we had any nonprofit outside of First Tee running programs there, or just First Tee themselves?
Sarah's correct, and I don't think it's been in the last year or two, but there was a time where they applied for one of our summer programs and received an award. I think it's like in $20,000 awards that we would do throughout the summer.
So it's just a summer program, no year-round program?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much, Director Richardson. Director Hendricks.
I always come with the good questions. I'm asking, am I understanding you to say that Sarah's report will be coming to us forthcoming? And my question is with regard to Joan. She asked many, many questions, but I noticed that you were responding to her. Now, is Sarah to give Joan what she's asking us, Joan, to wait until you finish? I believe in calling a spade a spade.
Yes, ma'am. So we asked our Chief Financial Officer, Sarah Linehan, to complete her report, and then we will open up the floor for questions. And so Joan was responding to that process.
So she
I will
has the
respond.
responsibility to give her information.
If she has, just like when you ask for certain information that we want to.
No, this is a budget. Because I heard you say, the reason why I asked the question, I noticed you sort of interjected a couple of times when Joan was talking as if Sarah will have all of this information that she's asking for all of us. Am I incorrect?
What?
Yeah, I'm just not afraid to say what's on my mind.
Well, I was just making certain, due to the questions that City Director Adcock asked, I wanted to help her understand many of the net positives that she was desiring to see, she won't see into quarter 3 and quarter 4. And so what we're sharing today is quarter 2, which happened, the decision that we as a board made for the budget amendment process won't be realized into quarter 3 and quarter 4, just trying to help her understand that you won't see it there. And so out of virtue of that, City Director Adcock was asking for some additional information from Sarah.
Can't get that from Sarah.
I will provide the roll forward of the positions that she asked for. It's something we normally provide each year during the budget, but she's asked for it sooner, and I will provide that.
And I asked the question because I noticed you interfered with Joan's question 2 or 3 times, okay?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Thank you.
No special people.
And you wanted the golf details and the fitness about that.
Yes, Director Adcock.
At the present time, the First Tee has their First Tee program. Those young people that they have in that program, which is completely separate from City of Little Rock, do we get any funding from what the parents pay for that student to go out there and play golf? No. So none of the First Tee programming is bringing in any money to the City of Little Rock?
Not the programming, but if they use the facility, then we receive that revenue.
If they use the golf course, those students use the golf course when they're out there being taught, do we get any funding from them using the golf course?
Again, I think, and maybe Tom can interject, but if they use the facility just like anybody else, they pay the fee.
Okay, and what fee do they pay?
I mean, we'll provide that.
Okay. And so then I'd like for you to include the fee that individual citizens that are going out there playing are
And
paying.
that's all I'll know. All I'll know is the revenue. I won't know whether it was a child that played or an adult that played. I'll just know what the revenue was.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Director Adcock. Director Hendricks.
Thank you. This is for Tom. I wanted to know if Tom has the status or any information that you could give me on this ordinance that I've been waiting for several weeks.
And Director Hendricks answered yesterday and told you that I really wasn't sure what you were asking for, that we have had in place for some time the ability to deal with properties, demolish or repair, and put a lien on it, and then the ability to collect anything on the lien is based upon where we are in the list. So that hadn't changed. I will say that in terms of the issues of landlords dumping possessions on the street and the issues of these big trees being left in the yards for us to haul off,
Only
those are
housing.
in the solid waste
Only
ordinance.
housing. I don't care nothing about trees. That's
Well, in housing, we've got the authority. It's a question of policy for the board of where you want to put the money. It's policy questions for the board. Where do you want to put the money?
we're talking about housing.
I know we're talking about
This
housing.
is where Alex will be working with you.
It's
This is where I'm talking about Alex and I working.
it's
with
where
you.
it's been for the last 20 years.
Yeah.
I mean,
And it can't be changed.
there's nothing to change. It's just a process we have to go through.
Let's go through the process.
Okay.
Okay. I also wanted to ask Mr. Moore, thank you, on capital zoning district, where you're aware of all these problems that we're having where Victor's department is not cutting lawns that's in the capital zoning district. And I had never known them to cut until capital zoning chairman sent me an email, and I sent him one right back.
The city does not enforce in capital zoning. That's been on. That's as Tom just said. That's state law, and I won't say that over the years there hadn't been some discussions from individuals who live in the capital zoning district that wish for the city to enforce, but. As I've said, I mean, those we just talked about our code officers and the 27,000. I think they got enough to focus on, and the rules are so different in capital zoning that so I think we've been always pretty consistent that we don't enforce code violations.
So the city has no right to cut capital zoning.
Correct.
Period. Okay. The last thing I want to ask you, I think we all had an opportunity to hear Victor speak tonight. And Mr. Moore, if it's anywhere possible, housing needs workers. They just don't have workers. I mean, you can go through Ward 1. I only speak for Ward 1, and it's ridiculous. These are things I've been looking at for 12 years. And nobody's doing anything. And when you call, they don't have staff. You know, I talk to these folks every day. They call me, I don't call them. And I take the time to talk to them. So is it anywhere that we can come up with some money to pay, employ people and to give them raises? They quit as fast as you hire these people. Because, and Mr. Moore, I know that's not your job, so it's the board. I think it's, but Mr. Moore can't make that decision, it's for the board.
Yes, ma'am, and we'll discuss that when Sarah, we'll discuss certain things like that here in a few moments as we go through our budget discussion for 2020. Yes, ma'am. Director Wright, did you have a question? Yes, ma'am. Do we have a motion to adjourn? There's a motion and second to adjourn our board agenda meeting. All those in favor, please say aye. All those opposed, please say nay. Meeting adjourned. We'll now start our budget policy meeting as we begin the discussion of our budget 2020 introduction. We'll first have, throughout this process, our Chief Financial Officer, Sarah Linehan, will discuss the next steps. What I first want to do is just really kind of set the playing field for this particular meeting. The goal of this meeting is for Sarah to share what's been discussed between executive leadership, being myself, Sarah, and Bruce Moore, on how we will proceed with the budget discussions for the 2020 year. This is actually early. Normally, budget discussions really don't start till late October, early November, and generally around the first or second week in December, the board has traditionally passed the budget. We want to make certain that everyone at the board has all of the knowledge possible about the budgeting process, number one, that has every question possible to be answered, number two, as we all come together as a board to realize our priorities. I'm a firm believer that a budget reflects our priorities. That will be reflected within the budget on where we decide and vote from a policy standpoint, budget policy, for the 2020 year. So that's the reason why we're starting early in September. There are a lot of things that we have on the horizon that has direct effects on our budget. One we know is our jail funding. We'll talk a little bit more about that. Health insurance, overall staffing, and things of that nature. And so we'll go into detail on that. So again, I ask that let's allow our Chief Financial Officer, Sarah Linehan, to go throughout the process, and then we'll open the floor for questions. And before we start, Director Richardson, yes?
Yes, quick question, Mayor Bruce. Is this based on the last minute legislation that we got from Dean about having policy discussion? This is what we're doing right now, correct?
Yes.
And I voted against that. So did we have a time restriction or time limitation on that?
I don't think so.
Yeah, I think it was.
At 6 o'clock, so this is going to be what, a 20-minute discussion?
I think we share that it clearly we're not defined by that time, but we can go over.
Okay.
Because actually, Tom, can you restate that? I think we start our board agenda meetings at 4 o'clock, and it's supposed to end by 5:30, maybe.
What it says is that the policy discussion will be after any agenda session and is to end at 6 o'clock.
Unless extended. Well, I guess my question, Mayor, and we can go ahead and get started. This is typically I've seen us vehemently reject last minute policy recommendations, and we didn't do that in this case. And I thought I heard some amendments or suggestions made to add to it with respect to time. I'm not sure we had that with respect to items or policies, but I think I heard somebody make that kind of recommendation, and I didn't support it. I didn't vote for it, so I just wanted you or Sarah or Bruce, somebody to remind me. And if we have to get ready to get out of here at 6, does it take a motion to extend it beyond 6? Because I thought I heard somebody make reference to a 6 o'clock deadline.
Yeah, I think it was referenced unless otherwise extended. I don't think we have to take a motion to extend, but
Okay.
We'll just move forward. With this being such a vitally important policy issue, being the budget, I think we can run over a little bit after 6, but totally understand if board members have to leave. But
So that depended on the issue. This extension Doris, I'm talking to the mayor.
Now,
Is that
Director
depend-
Richardson, you know I did not forward this piece of legislation.
Well, I'm just trying to be clear on it because it was quite
I don't
confusing.
think it'll take too long tonight. This is primarily informational. We don't have a lot of numbers available yet. So this is.
Again, we're just laying the groundwork, the introduction on how to proceed, and so we'll go through this process, then allow. Again, we want to make certain everyone's educated about the budget process, has a thorough understanding as we move through, because we plan at least. If not weekly, but definitely bi-weekly. We got some proposed dates that may or may not change. But please expect to be discussing the city's budget from now until November. Hopefully November. That's an aggressive goal. I think we can get there since we're starting early, or until December.
Thank you, Mayor.
Okay, so if we go to our first slide, this is just an overview of the process. We talked a little bit about it back in on the 27th, August 27th, but the baseline for the 2020 budget is going to be the 2019 adopted budget adjusted for the annualized impact of the June 4th budget amendment. So you'll recall the budget amendment was actually just for a portion of the year, 6 months of the year. We're using the annualized impact of that as the starting point for our 2020 budget. The mayor, as he just mentioned, established a goal of having the budget adopted by the end of November with several public information sessions, and we had our initial discussion at the last agenda meeting on the 27th. On the next slide, the mayor and the city manager, our executive administration, got together, and these are the priorities that they have established that are also consistent with those that are in the Scott script. Quality of life being number one, public safety, infrastructure, education, economic development, and housing. Next slide, continuation of the overview of the process. The Treasury Manager has already reached out to departments to begin gathering projections and rate adjustments for any permits, fees, or charges for services. We request projections from the utility service providers. Those normally are received closer to the end of the year, usually in November. The Treasury Manager is tracking and has tracked monthly revenues for as long as I can remember. And he works with the state and the county regarding local tax projections. We use those forecasts and those historic trends to help project our future revenues. On the next slide, or right here, waste disposal rate adjustment. You all added that item to the agenda. That was the M2 adjustment. The rate study was presented to the board on August 13th. The ordinance to implement rate changes, if adopted by the board, would be effective January 1st, 2020. A draft of the glass recycling request for proposals in the final review process. We expect to have that out shortly. And again, the intention is that any rate adjustment that might be associated with the glass recycling also be effective January 1, 2020, if approved by the board. With our expenditure forecasting, information technology has begun pulling preliminary data. They pull it from multiple sources, the human resources data, the payroll data, our benefit modules, to form the basis for our personnel forecast. We obtain the contribution rates for pension funding from LOTFI and APERS, and then for our non-uniform plans, we get information from our actuaries. Health insurance options, we've had requests for qualifications out for that. We are still evaluating options and proposals, and I believe that at the next agenda session, there will be a discussion regarding the health insurance. Our other post-employment benefit funding, workers' compensation funding, unemployment funding levels, those are all also being gathered at this time and reviewed. Continuing on with our expenditure forecasting, we are obtaining information from our outside agencies. We're already aware that our regional county detention facility fee will increase 25%. That will equate to just under $500,000. I have a budget planning meeting scheduled with Rock Region Metro on Monday the 16th to begin reviewing their budget request. And then as we talked about, both during the amendment process and during the adoption of the 2019 budget, the Art Center minimum funding requirement of $700,000 for 2019, those funds came from the 1 cent lodging tax that was available, had been previously accumulated prior to the issuance of the bonds. Now that those bonds have been issued, we cannot use that source for that. Those revenues are dedicated to the debt service on the bonds. So this funding will need to return to the general fund. This expenditure will return to the general fund. Moving on, the grants manager has reached out to the departments for grant match needs. Last year we did have to take out of the budget the undesignated grant match. So we'll be evaluating what we have available for grant match. The departments also plan on grants they want to apply for and let us know what kind of match they may need for that. As the mayor has discussed, and Emily Cox is helping to coordinate, we've got a program performance review underway currently to evaluate program efficiencies and effectiveness, and those results will also be used in trying to formulate our budget. Information is currently being gathered from the departments. They are going to be providing their aspirational goals, necessities for 2020, contract information, and then also information about managers and supervisors, the number of folks supervised by each, and that kind of thing as well. On the next slide, I'm going to begin to kind of show you where our baseline for the 2020 budget will be. So the first column there is just the adopted ordinance. This is the one that you all adopted December 2018. The annualized amendment takes our budget amendment, but it's the annual impact that was provided to you when we did the budget options for the annual amendment. So the $780,000 increase for sales tax is the portion that related to the Act 822 for the internet sales. The reduction in charges for services is a combination of the increased revenue for the Jim Daly Fitness Center of about $118,000, offset by the reduction in revenues from the repurposing of 2 golf courses. So that net adjustment is $504,000. As we turn to the next slide with the expenditures, the $696,147,000 deduction on general administration, that's primarily the largest piece of that is the reclassification of the $500,000 from the contribution for Rock Region Metro from the general fund to the street fund. There was also we eliminated a position in that department, and then we reduced the contract for the chamber by $50,000 annually. It was a $25,000 quarter impact. As we move on down the line, I'm not going to go through each of these, but these mostly have to do with the staffing reductions, and this is the annual impact of that happened with the adoption of the budget amendment. And then on the next slide, you see the remaining through the various departments, with the largest impact in Parks and Recreation and in golf. So the total expenditure reductions were $3,238,760, which would bring our baseline budget from $200,990,000 to $197,751. Then on the next slide, we show the total revenues where we had the net increase in revenue of $504,000, the reduction in expenditures of $3,238,000, which would give us a positive of $3,743,000. And then we reduced our transfers out for the children, youth, and family, and then also for the Cities of Service program. So that gives us $4,590,000 to help offset those one-time revenue contributions and the one-time expenditure reductions that were included in the balanced adopted budget. So this is our starting point as we begin looking at 2020. So as we look at the next slide, I just wanted to show the difference because what our original target was a $5 million reduction. What's not reflected in those numbers, because it was not in our original adopted budget, when we originally adopted the budget for First Tee, we only funded the first quarter, but an annual funding would have been $480,000. So that additional $360,000 is no longer required. That reduced our budget $4,950,000. The $50,000 difference was when we added back for the chamber. We did not affect them the entire amount that we had proposed. So the net golf savings, which takes into account the reduction in revenue, the reduction of the First Tee contribution, and the reduction in expenses, the net savings from repurposing the 2 golf courses was $642,000. What none of that includes, and we've talked about some of those things, we know, as was highlighted on the expenditure, we're going to have increase in the jail funding. We're going to have an increase in the debt service for the short-term financing note that we've issued. In addition to those reductions in the one-time transfers in, like the $750,000 we transferred from the street fund to the general fund last year of accumulated fund balance, those things go away. So, but the good news is we're starting from a point, we've already made some of those adjustments moving into the new year, so we won't have quite as many things to do in order to try to balance our budget. So hopefully, as we move through this process, the next time I give you a presentation, we'll start having firmed up some of those expenditure forecasts or revenue forecasts. So on the next slide, the mayor has talked about wanting to have public sessions. I will tell you that 5 minutes before the meeting started, the mayor's executive assistant, Bridget, let me know that we're already going to have to change some of these dates. But the first date, I believe we're good. And that's the hardest facility to nail down, but we have reserved center at University Park for Monday, September 30th. I don't have the start time yet, but we wanted to start these sessions, after work. So I'm not sure if it's like 5:30 or 6 o'clock, but the timing will be after work. The next 3, Bridget has told me we do have a conflict. We're likely to have to move those to the Thursday. That will be the target, the Thursday of that week. We want to hold one at Southwest Community Center, one at Dunbar Community Center, and one possibly at Hall High School. And then we're proposing trying to do one at Fellowship Bible Church for wards 4 and 5, and that would happen hopefully around Monday the 18th. And then with a target for adoption of the budget on the last meeting in November, which would be November 19th. But obviously we have additional time if we need to extend that. So that is really the extent of my presentation right now. And as I mentioned, the next hot topic, we've already talked about the jail. The next hot topic will be health insurance.
And we'll have a health insurance conversation on our next agenda meeting, September it's just the next agenda meeting. And we'll have our partners.
First.
Excuse me?
No, 24th. 24th.
September the 24th. And we'll have our insurance broker who will conduct that presentation. Director Wright?
Thank you, Mayor. As you said, Mayor, the budget reflects our priorities, and I want to make sure that I'm clear on some things. Sarah mentioned the Scott script, and I understand how we've always looked at parks and recreation as quality of life, but is that the same thing for you as your Scott?
And I think when Sarah shared that, she was just sharing that a lot of the budget priorities that were shared between our Chief Administrative Officer, Mr. Moore, and myself align not only with previous years, but also with the transition report that we had, a community transition report.
Okay.
And so when we talk about quality of life, yes, it does include parks and recs.
Okay. I just want to be clear that that is what you're saying, what that means, because that's not really what that means to me. To me, it means the neighborhoods, how the livability of the neighborhoods, how...
and that would be included in that as well.
That quality of life.
Yes,
and so I want to go on record as saying that I want to make sure that we pay some special attention to this because of the livability
Yes,
factor.
ma'am.
Kids come home to these neighborhoods after they leave school. If the weed lots, if they're overgrown, boarded up houses. All of this stuff impacts the quality of life of that child and on their psyche when they leave that neighborhood and go to school, and then when they leave school and they come back to the neighborhood. And my concern is that gets lost in the mix. You know, we say we're fully staffed in codes, but I don't believe that, because I know what the staff is saying to me when I drive by junk cars that are on the side with grass growed up under them that you know have not been moved in months. You cannot tell me that we have a systematic process where we are inspecting and going through these streets in the lower poor neighborhoods. This is impacting the quality of life of the residents. It's impacting the property values in that area. People can't sell their properties for what they owe on the house. All of this plays into to me as the quality of life. And I just want to make sure that we look at this in our budget process. And I'm asking the question, Mayor, is there any way that we could take, and I know the budget's tight, I understand all that, but is there any way fees, permits, and things that are associated with housing, rental properties, is there any way to take some of that money and apply it to our code staff to get these people raises so that we don't have the turnover that we have? They need to be making at least $32,000. And they're not. And I don't care what kind of report we've gotten. I've talked to some of these people personally, and they can't pay their bills. Some of them say they're getting food stamps.
And so, again, one, I want to make sure you're aware, when we discuss quality of life, we are discussing quality of life in place. That includes parks and recreation. That includes the walkability and livability of our neighborhoods,
That's what
our parks and trail system. So that's all a part of anything has a relationship to quality of life in place here in the city of Little Rock. So we do agree.
Okay.
I do want to caution this board. We all, these executive administration priorities are because as it relates to the law, the chief administrative officer and myself co-prepare the budget and present to the city board of directors to approve. And so that's where the city board plays a role in the policy. And so if there's concern with what we offer or recommend, there's opportunity to help make changes and amendments to that process. But no, I just want to be certain and sure that we do have a tight budget. That's the reason why we had to cut the budget in the middle of the year. We are committed, just as we were when we all came together to amend this budget to make certain that we put us on a firmer financial footing. And there are going to always be competing thoughts and ideas from each member of this board on what's a priority for each of us individually. And we all represent citizenry that have elected us to advocate on behalf of them. And so we have to come together, have a balanced budget, number one, that meets the needs of the priorities that we collectively agree on.
And I appreciate that, Mayor, and I thank you for the very well said. But when I'm going on a tour, hopefully with Mr. Moore Friday, and when I take him to look at some of these areas that I'm getting the phone calls about and that I'm riding around and taking pictures about, and then sometimes, as you know, get skewered over
Yes, ma'am.
things that are not my fault, that I know what the issue is, but I don't have a solution because I can't move it down the line. And I know what it needs to be. I've written up proposals, I've submitted things, and I've asked, let's do this. Let's take a target area. Let's systematically go through here. Let's get it cleaned up. Then we go back and we do more of the spot checking. Can't get that done. So what I'm saying is there any way? Can we look at that? Will you all look at
Yes, ma'am.
trying to move some money to make sure that we can raise
We can-
the salary of the code officers?
Well, I can't say that we will look at that. We'll look at how do we address and be more effective with cleaning up the areas that you have referenced.
Okay.
We'll look at that.
Thank you.
Director Adcock.
Mayor, I would like to have a copy of each time when we have one of these sessions, a hard copy, because I like to refer back to stuff and everything. Also, the presentation earlier, I would like to have a hard copy on that each time we do a financial report. I know I have 4 filing cabinets in my house that are all filled with all this stuff, and I like to keep up with it.
Yes, ma'am. We'll make certain that happens. I do apologize. I thought that was those copies were being made. So we'll get that corrected. You should have had one today. We'll make certain that's corrected. But glad again today is an introduction. But we'll have that corrected for our September the 17th meeting. 24th meeting. Vice Mayor Wyatt?
Wow. I agree with Doris, Director Wright, in regards to the housing issues and the code enforcement. But I can give you an example of a location in Western Hills where the neighbors called me out. I went and looked at it, and there's a car that was up on blocks that had been sitting there, and they were just, they have to drive by it every day. And so they called me and said, you know, what's the deal? Well, come to find out, that car and that property had been in court for 2.5 years. They had a stack of paper this thick of where they've been trying to move the issue. We've not been able to get things through environmental court to get things resolved. So that needs to be a part of our equation when we're looking at quality of life and when we're looking at housing, is how we move things through environmental court and get some resolution to that. And I know some people, they've had homes that had been brought before us that we were going to raise the property. And they said, well, just put me back in environmental court, because they had more time to work on, you know, their property. So I think that's part of the equation, and anything we can do to move these properties and help code enforcement with their job, I think would help our community and help our neighborhoods.
Again, that is duly noted, and as our Chief Administrative Officer and myself, along with our CFO, weigh the many competing issues and concerns, we'll try to create that format within the budget that's proposed to you all. And again, as you look at those priorities, housing is a part of that, and infrastructure and quality of life.
I just find that that's a stumbling block for us on a lot of occasions. So somehow we need to work through that issue.
I agree. Director Hendricks.
Thank you. I'm concerned about the court. I know we don't have anything to do with it, but is it possible that we could ask for some changes? It may be at the state level or whatever, that the court tends to just handle stuff. And the reason why I know, because there had been a home that had 200 tires in the backyard for over a year, and the court was just moving the date. That doesn't make sense. I've been talking about housing ever since I've been on this board. And you can call it what you want, but I call it discrimination south of 630. And it's no excuse. Again, housing is at the bottom of this list. Let's move it to the top. And all this other stuff fall under that. But I don't know.
And Director Hendricks, this is not these are all equalized priorities. It's not a 1 through 6, so it's not a ranking order. It's just literally there was no rhyme or reason to it at all. So it's all, these are all equalized priorities.
Well, we were thinking alike, so I'm glad you changed it, so move it up to the top of the list.
I'll make certain that we move housing up to the top of the list.
Yeah, make it up to the top of the list.
Yeah,
and you know, I know that I've talked about salary. Housing makes the worst money, and I think most of these people, Mr. Moore, maybe he can tell me, do you have mostly minorities in that department? Housing. You know, I believe in color. Yes or no?
You know, I mean, I don't know. We can look at that data. I mean, we've got a lot of, when we talk about housing, it's not only code enforcement. It's a pretty big department. So animal services.
Is that the one that Victor's over?
Correct.
Okay. Well, as far as I can see, it's all black. And I think something needs to be done about those salaries. It's ridiculous. I see a lot of people that are on payroll making money that they shouldn't even be making. It's ridiculous. Some of these people sitting around here, I know what I'm talking about because I've seen it. They're not doing anything, and they're making more money than those persons who are working hard with housing. That's my thing. You know, I don't know.
Yes,
I just don't mince words.
No, and we appreciate your candor.
That's the truth.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, darling.
Thank you so much. On this very important topic, do we have any more questions from our board members on the budgeting process? Just want to make certain that everyone has a chance, the opportunity to ask questions on today. We'll, on September 24th, we'll move again our health insurance plan discussion is going to be vitally important and dictates a lot of our budget, and whether or not we have raises or not. I mean, because we have to make some serious decisions about our health insurance and how that pertains to our budget. So I want to make certain that we're clear. There are a lot of things that we can't control that will dictate a number of different things. So just want to be very upfront about that. Yes, ma'am. This is the reason why I want everyone to ask questions.
This is a long shot. But are there any grants available for code enforcement stuff? I mean, I'm just looking for a source of revenue that would let us do better. What we're doing is not working.
Again, there are a number of different things that in this business, either we have an increase in the revenues, which are sales tax revenues, or we continue to make decreases in other areas, or most importantly, what we always choose, we want to have more job growth that produces more sales tax revenues for us to have more budget dollars in our coffers. And so it's a lot of adding and subtracting, and very rare that we have opportunity to do some multiplication in a budgeting process. So again, your executive leadership team is going to do our best to listen to all the concerns and balance them as best as possible, based on the priorities of not only this board, but the priorities of the citizenry that we all represent, and come to you, number one, with a balanced budget. A balanced budget for you to consider. And then if there are decisions that have been made by the board that we want to emphasize other areas greater than what we present to you, we also have to understand that when you emphasize more in one area, you have to take away from another area. And so when we come through this process, and again, that's the reason why I wanted us to start early, understanding the budgeting ramifications of, again, we were able to broker a deal with the Pulaski County judge, just instead of our jail funding to be double from 1.9 million to 3.8 million. It's now, for at least for the 2020 years, just only going to increase by 25%. But that's still $500,000 that we have to account for.
I understand all that, so I guess I'm gonna have to do this research myself into these grants, because I think
No, we have a.
it reflects.
What we'll
on
do
the
is get you.
child and their opportunities in their mind. If they see.
You've done a great job of identifying grant dollars for the Ward 6 in the West Central area.
I'll be looking.
Number one, yeah, I know you do a phenomenal job there. We want you to continue to do that, but we also will get you lined up with Karen Curry, who's our grants manager.
That's what I like, permission to be.
Yes, ma'am. We want you
Be on the lookout for this.
Yes, please do.
Because
Please
I
do.
feel like if I can tie what I'm talking about to public safety and the quality in that child's social emotional learning experience in their community, which is affecting what happens when they go to that school.
Right, now I'll have to give kudos to Director Kathy Webb and our Chief Service Officer and Bruce Moore. Before last year, they've been working hard to receive some grant dollars for social and emotional learning within the schools. So we already have that underway. That's going on in Cloverdale. It's going on in Baseline Elementary. So we're starting to see that positive impact. But I know you're speaking to the actual neighborhood,
Yeah,
and as well as Vice Mayor Wyrick. And so there's some federal dollars out there. And so we'll make certain we get a meeting set up with you and Karen Curry to kind of work on identifying that.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
I'm done.
Director Adcock?
I think the highest quality of life is housing, and housing shows up on this list on the bottom. But I think Director Wright and Director Wyrick and most all of us on this panel believe that housing is one of the most important things in our city right now.
Director Adcock, as I shared with Director Wright and Wyrick a few minutes ago, so I don't know if you didn't hear me or not, there was no rhyme or reason on how we do it. This is an equalized priorities. There's no 1A or 1B. These are all priorities that are associated with the city. And so even if we put it in alphabetical order, it wouldn't be at number one. So again, we just had, so sorry, I apologize for that. But we'll make certain for you and Director Wright and Hendricks that we'll have housing on the next time you see it. All right. It's my aim to please you. All right. Director Hines, anyone, we have any questions? I want to make certain. All right. No other questions. A motion to adjourn? There's a motion and a second. All those in favor, please say aye. All right. Adjourn.